Oh, looping. I don't hear it.
So far, so good.
So far, so good.
All right, you should be all set to go.
All right, so I'd like to welcome everyone to the Pathroot Family Guide to Addiction. For those of you who have not heard our live stream before, Pathroot is a service designed to help families who have a loved one that's struggling with substance misuse or addiction. And part of the ways that we help is to bring people into a conversation that have a story to share, something they've experienced personally, or advice that they can give us regarding how to better tackle this really difficult disease. And so today we're privileged to be joined by Bob Path. He's someone I've known from a business perspective for a number of years, but he has a very interesting story to tell. So Bob, why don't you start? I would love to give a whole intro on your background, but it would take me way too long. And you've done accomplished so many things, it would be hard to like list them all. So let everybody know who you are, what you've been doing in your career, and then we'll focus a little bit on the story that you want to share today.
Okay. And when I get to the point that my mother would be proud, Carolyn, you can cut me off. So
Okay, right. Yeah, I'll go like that.
Listen, I'm used to doing this, so as first and foremost, I'm the father of six, five who are still alive, and we're going to talk about my oldest, but author, speaker, talk show host, have reinvented myself multiple times. I'm a native of Baltimore. Grew up here Catholic, raised by a single mom in the inner city of Baltimore. So grew up with not a whole lot. And I have raised six kids. Youngest is 22, and Zach would have been 39 years old. After several business ventures, I reinvented myself and went back into my media career. I went to college to be a news anchor, and I just found myself at a crossroads in 2010 of a marriage ending, a business that just sort of imploded. And a brother who was dying of cancer. So it was a trifecta of a lot of really bad stuff. And it was an old God moment for me, and reinvented myself. 6 months later, I was on CBS radio. Then I landed on television, then back on another show. So I've hosted two television shows. I just produced a new radio shows, and just produced a new television show that I'm excited about. And really just do a lot of work in this writing, speaking, two more books, voice narrations, voiceover work like National Geographic I've worked for, and some others, and really enjoying it. 64, which still shocks me, really feeling, Carolyn, like this is the best time in my life, despite what I've gone through. And you know what I've gone through when I'm talking about it. I hope that this conversation will lead some folks to realize that life does go on. And that's really what my platform, Carolyn, is about, to sort of put a bow on that. Who am I, and why am I here, and why are we doing this? Is to really live my story out loud and to help others, and to let them realize that you can be happy, you can be very happy, you can be successful. Life does go on after losing a child, but how do you get there? So,
yep, that's great.
Right? That's me. That's me.
Is your mother proud of you now? And one thing also, too, I will tell you is I stalk you on Facebook because you eat in very interesting places in Baltimore, and you're always posting like what you're eating and where the restaurant is.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of fun. I don't live in Baltimore, but
I'm a single guy, and so I'm out all the time. I've been single for 12 years, and I have friends that own restaurant, businesses, and I'm out. I'm sociable. Otherwise, I'm sitting here.
But just so you'll know, it's being noticed. Like I look, oh yeah, that looks really good, because I own a restaurant in Atlanta, so I'm looking at what you're eating and what you're doing. So you referenced your oldest son. And you and I are in the same terrible club, in the respect that we both lost adult children to overdose. I lost my daughter Laura 6.5 years ago. You lost your son Zach, I think, in 2019. So I guess it's been 5 years.
5.5 years.
5.5 years, exactly. So why don't you tell us a little bit about Zachary and what happened with him?
Yeah, thank you. I was, and by the way, let me just sort of frame this. I've been divorced from Zach's mother for 26 years. When I share my stories and you see my stuff online, the names, I never bring up the names. It doesn't really matter. However, I do speak very candidly about the trauma, because what happened with Zach was really trauma related. And I believe that's so much a foundation of of addiction and depression and everything else that people are going through. So Zach was the oldest of four. He was 33 when he died, but his mom and I split up when he was 13. And Zach really never got over that. And so was torn up in many ways and struggled with that for lots of reasons, I think, being the oldest, being a male. There were three boys and a girl. And so that really, his first attempt, Carolyn, at suicide was when he was 13, was when my marriage to his mother ended. And it did not end on good circumstances, as a lot of them don't, but these were particularly bad. And he was traumatized. Now, I'm trying to deal with keeping my life together. I was 37 or 38 years old. I've got four kids, 4, 6, 12, and 13. I'm just trying to keep my head above water, not understanding personality disorders, certain behaviors, addictions, depression, anxiety, trauma, none of that. Really just trying to keep myself above water. And it wasn't until, I got further into it that I really understood the trauma about that. But 3 suicide attempts. Zach was a terrific athlete. He was a great writer, became addicted to drugs as a coping mechanism, which I believe, whether it's alcohol or drugs, it's a form of coping. And that's what he did. Was doing very well. Went to rehab 2 or 3 times, Florida, Texas. Came back, and I want to talk about that. Hopefully we'll have enough time. My thoughts on rehab and why most of them fail. But was doing well until he met the wrong person. And as you know well, you can't recover if you're hanging out with a crowd of drug addicts. You can't. And so he was very codependent, very needy, and an overdose on January the 21st of 2019 on heroin and fentanyl, and left 2 children. He was divorced, left 2 children. And so it's a sad story in very many ways. But yeah.
Yeah, so I want to explore just a minute about the revolving door of being in and out of treatment. So it sounds like, how old was Zach when he started using drugs? Was he still a teenager, or was he?
I would, and in fairness, so I remarried. His mom remarried immediately. I remarried a little bit later and had 2 more children. So I have 2 younger, 22 and soon to be 24. And there were a lot of things involved, and I'm going to be candid with you. There was some alienation involved, and it was a very, very, very difficult relationship to try to navigate, to try to co-parent. And I'm very candid, as you know, you see my post, and so I don't really hold back because I don't think there's any value in doing that. And I wrote a book on communication, so it's what I do. So I don't know the specifics. Unfortunately, if I had it to do all over again, not meaning there are lots of regrets, you and I could probably share this. If I knew then what I know now, maybe the outcome would have been differently, but that's not the case. And that's not what it's going to be. So I don't know a lot of the things. There are a lot of pieces that are missing because I was not as active in his life as I could have been and should have been for a multitude of reasons, Carolyn. So I don't know the specifics, but I do know that was really my second son, who was only 11 months old, came to live with me immediately. And was a different kid, obviously, and married as a child, and just really sort of saw the situation for what it was. Zach was really stuck there and probably didn't see any way out other than to find ways to cope.
Yeah, so one of the reasons that I asked, my daughter started using at age 14, and what science will tell us is that at the point in time when they are teenagers up to age 26, their brains are still developing. So, someone that's predisposed to be addicted, that kind of stacks the deck against them because they've started using substances then. I think I might beat you in terms of the number of treatment programs attended. I think Laura probably maybe 10.
Wow.
Not 2 or 3.
Wow.
So tell me what your thoughts are about the revolving door of treatment. Why do you think it's not helpful or not functioning in the way it should for a lot of people?
Well, I just think I'm going to make very general comments here based on our experience. I think it's a broken system. I think it's a corrupt system. I think it's a money grab. I think if you look at, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but the numbers I look at, The rate of, if you want to call it recidivism or relapse or whatever, is in the 90+ percentile. I don't agree with the way most of these places are staffed. I don't agree with, they call them halfway houses and sober living homes and all this other nonsense, which sort of leads to what I want to do with the wellness center. But I just do believe it's a broken backdoor system that is extremely expensive, as you well know. And most people will wind up back there. They game the system, and these places just treat, Carolyn, this becomes a bigger problem here. We just treat symptoms as a society, as these centers, and we never get to the root cause. It's like asking and answering a question. You say to somebody, hey, how are you doing? And the obligatory response is, oh, I'm fine. So it's like, oh, then we're okay. I've sort of changed that narrative, not to get off on another topic, but I was out one night at a restaurant, noticed this woman kind of looking off, and I said, are you happy? And I don't know where that came from, Carolyn, but it just did. Maybe it came from my faith. And I just said, are you happy? And she looked at me, first of all, like I had 8 heads, but had a smile on her face and said, no, not really. And then opened up. And then came up and joined somebody else tonight at the bar. And the next day texted me and said, thank you for saying that. So I think here's what I say when our kids are going into rehab. We acquiesce care. We put them on trains, planes, automobiles, and buses, and we send them to Dallas or South Florida, and we just want them fixed. We don't want to know too much about the drug world because it's dirty and seedy, and that's not who we are and what will the Joneses think, but we expect them to be fixed. Come back, and it's kind of like, you're okay now, right? And then let's not talk about it. Let's not do anything about it. And that doesn't serve anybody. And so I just think the system it's just fundamentally broken. And the approach that I've taken and what I want to do is really completely different. But let me say it again, we treat symptoms. We don't treat the diagnosis. We don't. So if you read Eckhart Tolle or you follow Tim Frazier or Dark Night of the Soul by Thomas More, we never get to the root of the trauma. We just keep throwing, you can die from methadone. You know that. You can overdose from methadone. So we substitute one drug for another, and we manage this stuff because there's a lot of money in medicine and cure and all that. And that's really what it's all tied to. You follow the money, and that's where it goes back.
Yeah, I want to add to that because what you said just now was I sent him in and we all want him to be fixed in 30 days. When they come out, they look much better than they did when they came in.
That's right.
But it also is also pretty true that if the system around that individual is not educated, they're not part of the support mechanism, and they don't understand their role in recovery, then that person is going to go back into the revolving door.
That's
and you're exactly accurate on your statistics. They're a little bit lower than you think, but not by much. 85% relapse within the first
Which
year.
is still, Carolyn, outrageous, right?
Right. So it's like if you and I went in to have knee surgery and our orthopedic surgeon said, hey, Bob, I'm going to really do a good job on that knee, but within 30 days, you're going to have to come back and have me redo it. We would all be outraged, right?
That's exactly right.
I think that's a part of it. Let's talk about these issues that are driving addiction. Obviously, we know there's a biological component, which is the brain's overproduction of dopamine. But what's happening, and what are the challenges and issues that also make substance use or recovery much, much harder?
Well, I think, and here we are on it, and I use it, you use it as well. But I think social media and the internet has really, certainly changed the world. That's a no-brainer. But the pendulum swings, and I think there's a lot of bad. And so I think the whole proliferation of suicide, and I had done a lot of work in the suicide space before Zach overdosed because of his attempts at suicide. I was in New York with Anderson Cooper when he was honored because of the work with his brother Carter when his brother Carter killed himself. So I think it's social media. I think it's the internet. I think it's the anxiety. It's the depression. It's the trauma that we really never get to. It's the breakdown of the family. Carolyn, if you look at the statistics, one of the top causes of death for white males over the age of 50 or 55 is suicide. we're less connected, we're less sociable. It's all these things. And so for these children, and you know, your 30-day comment, you can't fix anything in 30 days. You just simply can't. It's not enough time. The disease and the way the brain operates. I've had these conversations with a guy who I'd like to be my medical director. You just can't do anything. So it's not even a good Band-Aid, Carolyn. But I think it's all of these things that I personally see. I'd like to tell you I see it differently, but I don't. Really getting worse. Us being less connected, us being reliant. One of the top universities in the world, I'm not going to mention the name, but one of the professors came to me and said, and you may have seen this on my post, hey, we need to talk. We're doing some strategic planning, and you're a communication consultant who wrote a book. The employers are all coming back saying, oh, all your students are smart. They check off the boxes, they do the reports and all that, but they cannot communicate. They can't communicate. And I see it in the neighborhood. I live in the inner city here in Baltimore, and I see people walking around with their faces on their phones. And if you try to make eye contact with them, so, you know, we're not only we've raised generations of these kids who simply don't know how to communicate, which then leads to, I'm in pain, I'm struggling, I can't contract for safety, I'm thinking about killing myself, whatever. We don't have a platform that really allows for that, because then where do those people go? And, you know, the problems in the healthcare system, primary care, the shortage of primary docs, you know, all of this, Carolyn. So it's a systemic problem that's multifaceted. But I think, and then don't get me into the government and the borders and all that kind of stuff, because that's another whole thing that just really makes no sense to me. I don't care what side of the fence you're on, but come on, guys. But there again, follow the money. You know how many billions and billions and billions of dollars are tied up in this whole drug thing. So it's, I could go on and on about that. I hope I answered that question for you.
Yeah, I mean, it does answer the question, but it also begs, you know, this is a very complicated whack-a-mole problem. And perhaps a solution, not the only one, but a solution is much earlier in a kid's life, mom and dad need to be much more educated about the complexities.
That's right.
What they're finding themselves in, and have some early warning signs that the kid is struggling. So at 13 years old, that's pretty young to start a first suicide attempt. I would suspect maybe there were warning signs that you were not quite educated enough to see it back then.
Without a doubt. Yeah, without a doubt. And again, I it's very interesting for me. And I do say it's been 26 years since that divorce, and I'm well beyond that and have done some really great things. And I do believe that things happen for a reason. But I also look back, I take a critical eye to it, and there were just things that should never have happened. In some areas continue to happen. I have, other children who have struggled with things, let's just say that, because it's not like this suddenly goes away. So you're dealing with the trauma of loss of a child or loss of a sibling. And then I can't recall, do you have other children, or was Laura an only child?
She has a brother, older brother.
Yeah. So she has a brother. So there's the impact on that. So your loss, my loss as parents are different than my 5 kids and your son losing a sibling. I lost a brother to cancer, but after my parents' divorce and my father's behavior, my brother went off the deep end and had a life of drugs and alcohol, and at 54 developed liver cancer and died in 2011. So this has been in my face for a very, very, very long time. And I'll tell you this, I think it's important. Let me say this to you. I didn't have any male role models growing up. When I was a young boy, I had a Catholic priest attempt to molest me. I got away. I say that to you, that I never had my father wasn't a role model. My older brother wasn't a role model. So there, for the grace of God, I feel really put on this earth to make a difference in this space. Is it where I thought I'd be? No, but it's not where you thought you'd be. You didn't think we'd be doing this because you lost Laura and I lost Zach. But here we are. And what do we do with it? And so that is my mission now, and I do on a daily basis. Somebody reaches out to me who's struggling, either as a parent, what do I do, or the child. I have a friend, I can top you on the 10, I hate to say, whose daughter went into rehab 15 times. He's doing great now, had a baby, I think he's had a second child. And these people come up to me in Baltimore because it's small enough that I know a lot of people, and having 6 kids in this community, and people come up and say, I know who you are, and thank you for this, or thank you for that, or I'm sorry we lost your son. So I really look at it more as it's a calling, and I've got a platform to do it. I'm comfortable doing it. You can see I'm not breaking down in tears. I have my moments. Zach's birthday was July 21st. He would have been 39 years old. It was also my brother's birthday. So July 21st is a heavy day around here. But I can be a voice for change to save somebody else's child from going through and experiencing what you and I've experienced.
Yeah, another way to frame that, one of my daughter's friends, when she was in the hospital after an overdose, which ultimately we had to withdraw life support, shared with me we were in a position of privilege. And it was a little bit, kind of hard to understand that at the moment, but I think both you and I almost immediately, right after things happened, we jumped in and said, okay, well, we're going to be grief stricken no matter what. So why not take that grief and channel it? So when you think about the families that are listening to this live stream, they're scratching their heads like, what do I do? Treatment, this 30-day rehab is probably the only thing I know. What would you tell them that they ought to be paying attention to or revising how they think about it, so they're not just caught in that revolving door of something that's expensive and is not going to work? Well,
I think I'll go back and I'm using that word acquiesce. I think we have our heads in the sand. A lot of it's out of ignorance. We don't know. And that's what I mean. And so we defer to the experts. And some of the people I've dealt with were slick. Let's face it, Carolyn, they're selling a plan, right? They're selling hope. They're selling recovery. And we're in need of it. And so if you want to use it in its rawest forms, isn't it kind of a drug for us? You're going to fix them, right? You're going to take care of her. You're going to make her better. Okay, we're in. And so it's a very vulnerable time for your parents who are out there listening. But what I would say to people, get involved, ask those tough questions, create that bridge for your kids to come back and say, I am struggling with this. Certainly watch behaviors, but really do your homework. I mean, when I look at the model that I want to create for this center, which all the framework, the 501c3 is set up, it's going to cost me, not me, millions of dollars to do it the way I want to do it. So I'm going to have to raise money to be able to do it. But it's a model that I don't see anywhere else if it's out there. And I'm including Betty Ford. I've talked to people going to Betty Ford 2 or 3 times. And you might know some, you might have heard those things. But
right.
So what I would tell those folks is, listen, my faith, despite the issues I had with the Catholic Church and with this particular priest, they're bad people in all walks of life. That's my relationship with God. And so I was angry with God when my son died. I was like, I'm not going to use the F-bomb, but I'm going to tell you I'm not going to use the F-bomb. But it was like, God, what are we doing here? I've lost a brother, lost a mother, lost a father, lost this, lost that. And now my son. So I struggled with that. Ultimately, I went back to it, and it was my faith that got me through. But I would encourage your listeners to find something that you can hold on to, because another conversation I'd love to have with you at some point, and I imagine you've experienced this, I haven't, it shocked me, and you can't anticipate it, is how the narrative changes after you lose a child. You there?
I'm here.
Okay.
How
Somebody just tried to call and I had it on do not disturb. The narrative changes after you lose a child. I always say the phone stopped ringing, the casseroles stopped coming, the invitations dried up, and people would say, oh, they don't know what to say. I don't buy into any of those excuses. Say that. When my marriage ended, I was the president of my community, and I remember seeing my treasurer in the grocery store, and she's at one end of the aisle and I'm at the other pushing our carts, and she turned, Carolyn, and walked away from me. She saw me and turned and walked away, and I screamed down the aisle and I said, Linda, and I pushed my little cart down there and I said, what are you doing? And she said, Bob, I didn't know what to say to you. And I said, well, say that. Just say, I don't know what She said, can I give you a hug? She said, what happened to you? That should have never happened. I'm so sorry. On and on and on. He gave me a hug. But don't be afraid, folks, if you're listening out there, to have those conversations. We are not here to be friends with our children. If you can be friendly with them, great. But you're not their buddy. You're not their girlfriend, Carol. I'm not. They've got their friends and other people or whatever. You're here to be a parent. You're here to be a responsible parent. And you're here to make sure that they can be the best human beings that they can be, and certainly not visiting them on their birthdays at a cemetery.
Yeah, I think that what stops people are two things: shame and stigma.
Yeah.
And if people will be more forthcoming in what their struggles are, they can enlist more people to help, to empathize, to
That's right.
understand, to offer advice. My advice would be a little bit different, which is let's go back to this 30-day treatment. What I would have
Yeah.
done differently is recognize the appropriate role that family plays in the recovery process, and
Yeah.
to better understand when the person is in danger of doing things that are leading up to a potential relapse, and
Yeah.
knowing what to do about that. So I think it's um, perhaps that if I were going to change the way treatment functioned, it would be to incorporate the family all the way through the process, because they're likely
Absolutely.
very
Yes.
traumatized too, and have a really strong, solid, long-term plan that is a disease management plan.
Yes.
What are the triggers? What happens when you're
Yes.
being triggered? How do you respond to it? How do you, and one thing I know when you said wellness center, what's your wellness strategy? What other things can you do to make your body well, whether it's diet, exercise, nutrition, mindfulness, meditation, all those things
Yes.
can counteract the negative impact that you're feeling from, the disease that you've got, that's got its arms around you. So that would
Well,
be
that's
my
the model for what we're doing. That's the model for what we're doing is wellness and mindfulness. And so the nutritional aspect, the the physical, the spiritual, there's a spiritual element to what we want to do here in this wellness center. But you're absolutely right. Let me talk again about the family getting the. I was never involved in any of Zach's care. I picked him up at a recovery center in Tampa and went in and and that was it. But there was never, I have no idea what he discussed, if and when he had therapy, who was giving the therapy, none of that. So you are absolutely right. At the foundation, parents need to peel away any sense of embarrassment or whatever it is that they're dealing with, to roll up your sleeves, be very involved in your child's recovery and care and future. And so the family absolutely does. And these are difficult conversations. When you look at half of marriages end in divorce, and you look at things like parental alienation, and you look at all these other struggles that people are trying to manage, I know that these are difficult conversations to have, and it's not easy for everybody to put those things behind them, but it's critical, as you said, to the recovery, and it's got to be part of the plan.
Yeah, and I think that you have to anticipate if someone's not going through it themselves. It's really kind of your job to educate them as to what's happening to you, and not judge them for maybe being judgmental or not really understanding,
That's
because
right.
oftentimes the people around you are undereducated. And just to give you kind of an alarming set of statistics that we've been researching, somewhere around 80 million families in the United States alone have someone in their circle that's impacted by substance misuse or addiction. So that's a big, huge number.
Wow. Did you say 80 million?
80 million. And these stats come from SAMHSA, they come from the Kaiser Family Foundation, but they all kind of dovetail together that it's a much bigger problem than we think it is. And that's because we tend to hide it. We don't talk about it.
That's right.
We tend to hide it. And there's over 14,000 treatment programs that pump through, somewhere around 5 million people a year into treatment. But, there's a huge chunk of people that won't go. They don't go and get treated. So
Right.
we have to find alternate ways for them to manage that disease without, if they don't have the resources to go into that expensive 30-day rehab, start off in a different way. So, as we wrap up, let's talk a little bit about the Wellness Center. And obviously, we'd love to give people information about it as it starts to evolve and Pathroot. And hopefully, it can be a model for other programs to look at and say, gosh, I can change, because wouldn't it be great if this model succeeds, everybody copies your model, right? That would be your hope, that they'd all do that. So,
Yeah. So the Zachary Pav Center for Wellness and Mindfulness, as I said, is and I've got a video that I've not released because I was waiting for all the paperwork to be done because I've got people that want to start donating, money. And so we didn't have everything set up to really start doing that, is to build something from the ground up that, again, is a positive place. I'm going to throw this out because you'll know the name and people will be aware of it. Sort of modeled after more of like a canyon ranch, like really a wellness, not a spa. There will be work to do. We'll have a book of the week kind of a thing, but a place that you can practice spirituality. What kind of food are you putting into your system? And here's the other thing that might shock some people. I do not want to have this facility staffed by former addicts, people struggling, because a lot of them, that, in my opinion, Carolyn, I don't know what your thoughts are, is one of the problems in the system, because a lot of those people know how to game the system. So, you go through 1 or 2 rehabs, and it's always amazed me, suddenly become a counselor or a therapist or whatever, and now you're treating other people, but you also know the ins and outs and the angles and all those things. So our model does not include any of that. I'm not saying they're not exceptions to the rule, but really what I want to do is to put it in some bucolic setting. Maybe, Maryland's on the mid-Atlantic coast, of course, and maybe we put it down near the Chesapeake Bay somewhere. So, it's a peaceful, tranquil setting and environment, but really to get into, it's really about changing people's lives. It's not a detox center. Let me tell you that. You would not come to us because you want to get clean. You'd come to us after you got clean. Because what I hear is where the system again falls apart is after recovery. After recovery, like there's no support system. There's no safety net after recovery. A lot of those people return to what they know, sadly, are other addicts as well. And so they just go back to their old ways and their old habits. So it's a big lift. It's a major doing. I've had conversations with some way smarter and certainly wealthy friends and acquaintances of mine. One, to your point, one of my guys said, "Oh, before you go to this particular guy, you have to have all your numbers together." And our other friend said, "No, you don't, Bob, because you're a visionary." So it's going back to your point about why those places fell apart. You're way smarter than I am, Carolyn. I don't get into the nitty gritty and the numbers of all these things. Conceptually, I see it all, but I also see the vision. And so if you bring it to me and say, "Well, here's what we saw with the numbers," I'm like, I might question the numbers. I don't want to get into the numbers. And I know the numbers are important, but I'm the bigger picture guy. And I think I can bring in people or hire people, not to minimize their importance, to do the numbers and to make sure all that kind of stuff, is working and we're doing what we're doing. But we need people like you and I do it differently. And I think it's wonderful to really be able to get out there on our platforms, on our soapboxes, call it whatever you want, and create this awareness. And with 18,000+ followers on LinkedIn and people all over the world who know Zach's story, and people tell me all the time, and I'm sure they tell you, I feel like I know Zach. He's been going 5.5 years, but I keep him alive. I take a birthday cake to the cemetery every year on his birthday, and I slice a piece and I sit there and we have cake. And as long as I'm alive, everybody's going to know him. He was an incredible writer. He was a great athlete. He had this dry, witty sense of humor. His sister would say, "Zach, you can't say that." And he would say, "Why can't I?" So I want people to know and to remember. And Laura had her gifts and her talents and all those things as well. So I think you and I, let me give you some credit, and I want to thank you for having me on. Give people hope. We get them to, these two are going on with their lives because they have to, but they also are paying it forward and paying it back. And they know that what's happening in this country, in this world, is outrageous. The fentanyl coming over, made in China and coming in on the Mexican border and all that kind of stuff. This doesn't need to even be political, but it's nonsense and it can stop. People need hope, because if you lose hope, Carolyn, despair sets in shortly after that. And we're right there.
I think also, kind of in my final comments on this, I think what also is needed is to not act as if we're in the definition of insanity, which is repeating the same thing over and
Yes.
over again and expecting the result to be different. So I
That's
think
right.
what we bring to the table is looking outside the box and thinking about how do we change the paradigm. And not
That's
any
right.
one thing is going to be the end all be all, but it's a combination of those things. Well, if the family is not involved, how do we get them involved? If mental health is not being dealt with, how do we deal with that? If there's
That's
not
right.
a wellness strategy, how do we
That's
deal
right.
with that? And we'll leave it to whoever takes the reins in November to figure out how to shut the border down and get the fentanyl to stop. But
well, you know, the paradigm in the narrative, I'm going to tell you, I don't know what you've experienced, but when people come up to me and they'll either say, Zach sent a better place, and I say, thank you very much. I know you're well intended, but his best place is with his family. That doesn't comfort me. And then the people that go away, like I told you, the cast people say, oh, we'll get together after all this settles down. Well, losing a child never settles down. We learn to live with it. And Rose Kennedy said, time does not heal all wounds. And I can only speak for myself. I don't know how you feel about it. Time doesn't heal all wounds. It scars over. It allows us to manage. It allows us to get through. But we've lost children. You and I are members of a club that nobody in the world should ever belong to. And here we are. You know, I bury parents and siblings, whatever, but parents are not supposed to bury children. So what you and I are living through is unnatural, Carolyn, and it's demolishing. It's demolishing. We don't want anybody else to go through this.
well, and I think that's why we're working really hard to do what we do so that people don't join our club.
That's right.
We don't want
That's right.
we don't want
That's
to
right.
expand membership in our club. So
That's
with
right.
final thoughts, again, thank you for being honest and sharing your story. We'll make sure to talk about the Wellness Center and promote it on Pathroot when it comes online. And for those of you that are listening, there are a lot of resources, education, content, and help Pathroot that's targeted specifically at families to kind of change the paradigm of how you can take a long-term view of your role in supporting your loved one and improving the way that they recover and reducing the recidivism and relapse that creates that revolving door. So with that,
Speak up and speak out, right?
yeah, exactly. All right. Thank you, Bob. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Carolyn. Good to
All
see
right.
you. Bye.
Bye-bye.